Welcome everyone to our Pilot in Command webinar series from ForeFlight, Boeing, and Jeppesen. This presentation is going to be on ForeFlight Logbook and how to use it, how to make sure to go through and get your logbook set up, get transferred over, and start taking advantage of all of the great features ForeFlight has available for you. Quick note here, if you are experiencing any sort of audio issues, if you're viewing this on a mobile device, try enabling the internet audio setting or switch to a computer. We found that desktop computers or laptops tend to have less problems with audio on them. If you're viewing this on a computer, try leaving and rejoining the webinar. That tends to help reset everything. And if you're viewing on an iPad, go to Settings, Audio, change to Telephone instead of mic and speakers, and that's also been shown to help resolve everything in there. My name is Thomas Daugherty. I'm a product manager at ForeFlight, focusing on our logbook product, our checklist, and track log, all fit together really well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joey Arena, and I am a customer success coordinator here at ForeFlight and also a logbook content specialist.
So what are we going to go over in this webinar? First, we're going to start off by talking about logbook preparation. Then we're going to go through how to create a new entry and different ways that you can do that. We're going to talk about setting up automatic logging, so my flights are automatically turned into draft entries for me inside of my logbook. We're going to talk about setting up currencies so that I'm always up to date on what my latest currencies are and I never fall out of those currencies. We're going to talk about running reports so that I can get better insights out of my logbook. And then Joe's going to talk about getting your logbook converted from paper or a different logbook style so that all your past flights come with you into ForeFlight and you can start taking advantage of everything. So the ForeFlight logbook, a few notes about it here. Tracks hours, currencies, ratings, and endorsements across all your ForeFlight connected devices. It's available to everybody on those Plus plans, which is almost all of our users. If you've been with us for a really long time and you're on one of our legacy plans, we can get you upgraded to Plus and you can have that logbook added for you. If you're a business or an MFB customer of ours, we can also get that as an add-on to your subscription. And with all the things that come inside of ForeFlight, you get access to our Fanatical Pilot Support team. That's Joey, and he's going to help you answer all those logbook questions and everything for you so that you can get set up and you can start using the logbook right away. So let's talk about some of the differences and similarities between ForeFlight's logbook and a paper logbook. ForeFlight's digital logbook is essentially just a digital version of a paper logbook. So it meets all of the legal requirements, it fulfills the regulations based on logbooks there. And so you're entirely good to go with a ForeFlight logbook. You don't need to keep a paper logbook as some sort of backup. If you did need a paper backup for, let's say, a job interview or to give to somebody else who needed your logbook data, when exported, ForeFlight creates a PDF file that resembles the standard Jeppesen logbook format. So it's easy to get that out of the app. Both the digital logbook and a paper logbook are going to rely on that garbage in, garbage out. So just because it's a digital logbook doesn't necessarily mean that if you put an error in, you won't get an error back out. You just, the same way that you're careful about putting in data into your paper logbook, you're going to be careful about putting data into your digital logbook. Some of the advantages that ForeFlight has over paper logbook is that it's on all of your connected devices. So it's really easy to go through and start an entry on your iPad. You can edit data on your iPhone. You can then look that up on your other iPad. You have all these options so that you're not relying on one device. And if something happened to that one device, everything's backed up and ready to go for you as part of our ForeFlight sync system. Logbook entries are also created automatically from track logs or filed flight plans. We're going to talk about how to set that up later, but this means that I don't have to go through and enter every piece of data as part of a logbook entry. I can have ForeFlight do a lot of intelligent things around there, and I just need to review it later. I've got different multiple reports that are available for me. We'll see how some of those can be super helpful for things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do with a paper logbook in there. They can include photos and comments signed by your instructor and have all of that information in there. I love adding photos to my logbook entries for cool things that we see, cool aircraft on the ramp. It helps kind of jog my memory about what we were doing on that interesting flight. And those logbook entries are easily shared with others. Instructors are a great example here, where I can log on one of our iPads and easily send the information back and forth to the other device. Really handy instead of us both having to fill out a logbook entry. So how do I access logbook inside of ForeFlight? Here we are looking at the Maps tab inside of ForeFlight, and along the tab bar in the bottom right-hand corner, we have our More button. Tapping on that's going to slide out our app drawer here. And one of our options is Logbook. I can tap on that tab, and I'll be taken to our Logbook home screen. This is where I'm going to go through and set everything up. I've got some options on the left-hand side that let me see different menus, reports, and hours. And then on the right-hand side, I've got my logbook details for each of my individual flights. Tapping on any of those flights allows me to see the entry itself, see all of the details available into it. The first thing that we're going to set up on a new logbook here, so I can start using it, is all of my qualifications. ForeFlight is going to want to know that what type of pilot am I? Well, what's my medical certificate expiration? Adding all of this stuff in is going to start letting me take advantage of those currencies that ForeFlight's going to track for me. So on that left-hand side down there, I have a qualifications section. Tap into that, and I can see all of the qualifications that I have available right now. If I have a new one that I want to add, I can hit the plus button in the upper right-hand corner. And I can add things like certificates, I can add ratings, and I can add endorsements for different things. Maybe my instructor wants to sign me off for a new endorsement. This is where they can bring that in. Let's add a new certificate to my qualifications. And ForeFlight's going to ask me what type of certificate it is. So I see things like student pilot and sport pilot at the top. I've got medical certificate, knowledge test certificate down towards the bottom down there. So I can easily tap on medical and add all of that in. I can also go through and add a rating. The ratings are going to be tied to a certificate. So first thing I need to do is select what certificate I want to add it to. And then it'll give me options for adding different types of ratings on. Endorsements. I have the ability to look up endorsements through our library of the text out of the AD for all of this. So if I don't know the actual name or text of an endorsement, my instructor can simply hit the lookup button here, look up that particular bit of text, fill in the relevant details, add their signature, maybe add a photo of my shirt from my solo or something like that to kind of add some context to it, and add that to my logbook. Speaking of instructors, we also have some instructor tools in here. Maybe I'm an instructor and I'm setting up my logbook for the first time. I just added all of my certificates and endorsements there. I can tap on the Instructor Tools section just below qualifications. And ForeFlight's going to give me a few tools to use as an instructor in my logbook. So I've got a record of all of my endorsements so that I can go through and see who I've signed off inside of ForeFlight remotely. I can tap the plus button and I can send an endorsement remotely to a particular student. That way I don't actually have to have their iPad in front of me. I really like this if a student is working on a knowledge test and they've sent me a couple of practice exams and they're doing really well. We don't have to meet up just so that I can sign their logbook and send them a nice remote endorsement. To make signing that a little bit easier, I can, in the setup section, add a digital signature of my certificate number and signature so that ForeFlight can use that when signing endorsements. So I can go through, I can add my certificate number, my expiration, and my signature, and that just is one less thing that I have to fill out every single time I'm trying to do an endorsement for someone. Well, now that we know who we are as pilots, we need to set up the aircraft that we're going to be flying. Inside of the logbook, there's an aircraft section. And this is where I can go through and manage aircraft in my logbook. An important distinction here is aircraft in my logbook are different than aircraft in the specific aircraft section inside of ForeFlight. Those aircraft in the aircraft section are active airplanes that I may be flying today that I want to plan new flights around. The aircraft in my logbook section are historic aircraft that I've flown before. The way that I like to think about it is there may be an aircraft in my logbook that no longer exists. I wouldn't want it in my flight's aircraft that I would be planning with because the plane's not around anymore. I won't be able to plan a new flight in it. But I don't want to lose any of the records that I have in my logbook based around that aircraft. You can take an aircraft from your flight section and transfer it into your logbook, or you can create a new entry in here with all of the relevant information. To create that new entry, you can hit the plus button in the upper right-hand corner, and ForeFlight's going to ask me details about this. It's also going to alert me that for accurate currency and reporting, I require several of these categories. These are the categories that are highlighted in orange here. I know that I need to have those filled out. I can go through and set the type of equipment to aircraft or simulator. I can fill out details such as the type of aircraft, category, class, make, model, year, gear type. The more of this information that I add to my aircraft in my logbook, the more ForeFlight's going to be able to do with it to give me things like currency and reports. So even though those 4 items are the only things that are required to be filled out, the more information that I can put about an aircraft in here, the better. I also have the ability to add a photo. I think this is helpful. If you fly a lot of aircraft at a school or something like that, you can add a photo and remind yourself what aircraft that was. And then you can see your associated entries for that aircraft. This is a nice way where how many flights did I do in that particular airplane? I can see all of those associated entries here as part of my aircraft section. I'm also going to want to set up my logbook settings before we start logging here and make sure that my logbook is configured for my usage. Down on the left-hand side, I have a settings option down here. Selecting that, I see a few different things from general logbook options to the ways I calculate total time. I can configure my fields, and I can enable those instructor tools. Maybe I'm not an instructor, I don't need that section in there. One of the important ones in here is the draft entry creation. Mentioned that ForeFlight can automatically create a draft entry for me based on things like track logs or flight plans. This is the section in which I can tell ForeFlight that I want it to create a draft entry based on these different things. So right now, every time I record a new track log, ForeFlight will create a draft entry based on that log. I could also select to have filed flight plans so that ForeFlight will create a new draft entry for me every time that I file that flight plan. Whatever one of these ways works better for you is going to allow you to more easily and automatically record those new logbook entries. I also have some options for total time calculation. Maybe I'm using Hobbs time to calculate my total time. Maybe my company or aircraft require block time, duty time. I can select either of those, and that will use those fields for my total time use button. We'll see how that works a little bit later. It's just going to be one less thing I have to type out when I'm making a new entry. I also have autofill settings. These are the sections that I want to fill out with those total times. So maybe I'm always flying PIC, maybe I'm always flying dual given, cross country. I can set any of these fields up so that that information is automatically filled out based on total time. And then I can configure the fields inside of each entry. So I can go through and deselect or select any of these that work for me. Maybe I'm not flying for hire and duty time doesn't have any effect on me. I can deselect this and no longer see that on each entry. I also have the ability at the bottom here to set up custom entries. or custom fields. So here you can see that I've made one on cross countries over 50 nautical miles. I like to track this for regulatory ratings, but I can add new fields that are counters or text fields, any kind of item that may be useful for me in tracking my tracking inside of my logbook. ForeFlight can help me manage all of that. Well, I feel like we've set up our logbook quite well. We've made our qualifications, we've added our aircraft that we need, and we've configured all of the settings for our particular operation. So let's look at 3 ways that we can create a new entry inside of ForeFlight when we're out flying. The first is inside of logbook itself. In the upper corner here, I've got a plus button. When I tap on that, I can select new entry. That new entry is going to add a blank form where I can then go through and fill out all of the details about my flight. I find this really common for flying as an instructor or student, where I just need to hand somebody an iPad and they can start filling out all of the information into it. I can also send from the Maps or Flights page. So if I'm on my Maps page, inside of my flight plan, I can hit Send To, and one of my options is Logbook. This is going to take details like the to and from that flight plan into my logbook entry and start filling out some of that information. So it just takes one of those steps out where I don't have to fill out quite as much information because I already have it on my Maps page. The Flights tab has the same Send To button, and I can do the same process to send a logbook. My favorite way is by using track logs or automatic logging. So in my Settings tab inside of the app, I tap on More and Settings. One of the options is track logs. So I can enable stop-start control, and I can enable auto start and stop. This will make sure that I automatically record a track log every time ForeFlight is open and detects that we're flying the aircraft. Then in my logbook settings page, my draft entry creation, I can set track log as one of my options. This means that every time that ForeFlight records a track log, it'll make a draft entry inside of my logbook that I can review and approve. The nice thing about this is it's going to take metrics from that track log, like distance, times, all of that information, and bring it into my entry. So I have even less fields that I need to fill out when I want to approve that particular entry. A bonus way to bring new entries in, this is a recent feature we released, is if I have a G1000, that G1000 actually records those track logs as part of the SD card on there. And I can import those into ForeFlight using the new import option in here. So if you've got a G1000 equipped aircraft, this is a great feature to explore and to use that to bring those files across. So those are the 3 main ways that you can create entries inside of ForeFlight. You've got your default in Logbook with the plus button. You can send it from the Maps or Flights tab, or you can have it create a draft entry automatically from your track logs.
Hey, Thomas, for the people that are tuned into the webinar today, can you add a little more explanation about how the automatic track logs are recorded so that they can understand why in certain situations they may not show a logbook entry automatically in their logbook?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is something that we're always evaluating to make sure that we have the most accurate flight detection possible. Right now, this is going to look at both your speed and your altitude from the GPS inside of ForeFlight. So ForeFlight needs to be open and active when you take off in the aircraft and when you land the aircraft. And that way it'll detect those events and start the logging automatically. Personally, I always have as part of my checklist to make sure that the automatic record has started before I get ready to take off. So as part of my before takeoff check, I make sure that my blue record button in the lower portion of my maps page is highlighted and I'm already recording. If I haven't, I tap that button, and that way I know that I always have that track log started and ready to go, so that way my draft entry is as accurate as possible.
Fantastic. Those are great tips for the users at home.
Well, now that we have everything added in and we're logging new flights inside of our logbook, let's talk about adding currencies. This is where the digital and my digital logbook really comes through. I start adding capabilities that a paper logbook could never do for me. So on our logbook page, I have a currency summary and I can add new currencies. Tapping on that button will give me different types of currencies that I can track. In this case, we want to track a general currency for any of the categories that we're rated in. I can easily go through and select airplane single engine land or multi-engine, and ForeFlight's going to start tracking my general landing currency for each of these aircraft types. I can also track things like nighttime for any of those different categories. I can track IFR, and I can track specific aircraft type currencies. One thing to think about on the aircraft type here is I can track both my 12-month any aircraft currency and I can track my 24-month specific aircraft currency. Those are separate currencies in there, and I'll want to make sure that I'm tracking those appropriately if I have multiple type ratings in different aircraft. Lots of great options in there, and building out those currencies are going to make sure that I'm always legal to fly and I know exactly when each of these items is going to expire. Once I've got those currencies tracking, then I can go through and tap on any of them to get specific details about that currency. So I can see that my flight review, I have days remaining, I have the currency requirements in case maybe I've forgotten how often my flight review needs to happen. I can see the entries that are affecting it and the entries that are not affecting it. Reports. Now that I've got, let's say, all of my past year of flying in and logged inside of ForeFlight, now I want to be able to look back and gain insights and details out of that flying. So I'm going to go to the reports section inside of Logbook, and now I have several different ways that ForeFlight can present this information to me. I can go through and look at a condensed logbook so that I see all of my entries like I would in that Jeppesen paper format if I needed to print this out. I can see my experience report broken down by different characteristics, category, class, even different aircraft, so I have specific details for, let's say, my insurance. I can see an 8710 style report. No longer do I have to go through and try and remember what cross countries were at night, all of that fun stuff. I've got all of this brought across for me. And one of my favorite is things like our progress reports here. This is going to look through my logbook and compare it to the private pilot airplane single engine land experience requirements for certification and tell me which of these I have ready to go. So I can see how many flight hours I have left to do, how many hours of flight training I still require. I think this is a great tool for students so that they can stay motivated and fully understand how much progress they've made and how much more work they have to do to get that private pilot certificate. I like to show students this. Really one of my favorite things in there. We also have this report for instrument airplane so that pilots who are trying to add on that instrument check can go through and see that same progress report. So getting in my existing logbook into ForeFlight, we've just gone through all of the different ways to do my current logging, but I've got several paper logbooks of different entries from my flight training to instructing and all of that. And I want to be able to get all these great insights that ForeFlight can provide out of those same logbooks. Luckily, we've got Joey with us, who is just an expert in getting all of that information from my old logbooks brought across directly into my new logbooks.
Thank you, Thomas. Bringing your paper logbook into ForeFlight can be a very large task. A few weeks ago, I did another webinar on this specific topic, and you can find that webinar at foreflight.com, and you'll be able to locate the On Frequency series of webinars there, and you can review that webinar for step-by-step process in bringing these logbooks into ForeFlight. But for today's webinar, we're just going to do an abbreviated version of that and do the highlights of the best methods for you to be able to do this. First, we're going to start with how to do it actually inside the application. In performing this task, we do Ketchup Entries. Our Ketchup Entries are just a way to get all of that information in a single form of data. So there's 3 types of Ketchup Entries. Thomas mentioned having perhaps 3 previous paper logbooks. When you end a paper logbook, you can actually just take that page line summary, and then when you open the brand new logbook, you just add that total across the top and just start from that new line. So we'll review bringing that information in one of the next slides. The other way to do this is called time by type. Time by type is going to allow you to generate that experience report so that you'll be able to understand all of the hours that you have per type code. And then that will just permit the ability to use some of the more advanced features in the logbook in the reporting area. And very similar to time by type is the time by tail. And time by tail is exactly what it says. You're just going to enter a total time per aircraft identification. And you will still be able to generate a time by type report. However, you will also have the ability to have all of that information done per tail number also, so that you can be able to use the search function and find time that was actually flown in that particular aircraft. So when we're talking about a page line summary, the page line summary is just one line entry in ForeFlight that brings all of your previous experience into the ForeFlight logbook. We need to think about when we're going to bring this data in. So the date is going to be the first thing we really need to consider. If you have previously been working in your ForeFlight logbook and the time that you're bringing in supersedes that data, you should post date this to prior to your very first entry in ForeFlight. However, that's not 100% needed if you had previous and you were using them both at the same time. So if you were using both ForeFlight and a paper logbook, you can just, once that paper logbook was complete, bring that in at another date. That is completely user specific, and you're welcome to make that decision. With the page line summary, we are not going to enter an aircraft or any route information. We want to make sure that we only have the date, and then we begin filling out our times and our categories from that point forward. You'll fill in your total time, PIC, solo time, cross country, your amount of, and most people in a paper logbook only log landings. So you can just bring in your landing information and so on and so forth. And that's how we would create that complete page line summary. The second form of Ketchup entry is called time by type. To create one of these entries, you're going to add the new entry, and then you're going to tap on aircraft. And once we tap on aircraft, we're going to enter the entry and just put in the attributes that are type related and not actually aircraft specific related. For the aircraft ID, we're going to just put in the name of the aircraft. So if it's a 172, just put 172. If it's a Cherokee, just put Cherokee, or you could even put PA28. But for the type code, this is where you're actually going to use the actual ICAO designator for that aircraft. So if it was a Cessna 172, you would just put Charlie 172. And then category class, airplane single engine land. And for gear type, fixed gear, engine type, piston. And that would be all the attributes for a 172, but we're making this for all of the previous aircraft that you've flown of that type. So if you had flown a retractable gear Aero or a Bonanza, any aircraft type, you're going to put those attributes in. Complete the rest of that profile and then press the back button. Then don't enter any route information and complete the rest of the form the same you did with the page line summary. This is going to allow the experience report to generate that information that's specific to that aircraft type and give you a report that will give you a total flight experience in that type of aircraft prior to your ForeFlight logbook. And then the third catch-up entry we're going to discuss is time by tail, which is exactly like time by type. The only difference is going to be that you're actually going to put in the tail number for this specific aircraft. For people that have only flown 2 or 3, maybe 4 aircraft in their flight experience, time by tail will be fine because you're not entering, dozens of aircraft. But for like flight instructors who have flown, maybe dozens of the same type of aircraft with different tail numbers, that's when the time by type would be more appropriate for a summary entry. So here, create it just the same way you did. Under aircraft ID, do the tail number, then don't enter any route information in, complete the rest of the information, and you will have a time by tail entry. Okay, so now that we've discussed the catch-up entries, if you decided that the easy route is not preferred and you actually would like all of your previous flight experience brought in, then we can use our import tool to bring that information in, or you can actually sit there with your iPad and enter each one of these manually, as Thomas had already shown you previous. I definitely don't recommend that if you have more than 100 hours. 100 entries you can do in about an hour. It wouldn't be that big of an issue. However, longer than that, it might take you some significant time. So the other way that I would suggest is utilizing a spreadsheet. And I use Excel personally, but Numbers or Google Sheets will be adequate. And you can download our CSV file from our website and then be able to enter the information in manually as you type. So using the CSV file that you downloaded from our website, this is what it's going to look like once it's been imported. And again, I'm using Microsoft Excel for this portion. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see the link to go to download this. With the ForeFlight Logbook import template, we take both the aircraft information table and the flights table and combine them into one document so that you can import that data in that method. Supported formats that we use for importing are going to be CSV, which stands for comma separated values, TSV, which are tab separated values, and raw text files. There's a lot of logbook programs out there that you can import that export in these other formats, such as TSV or TXT, and we do support those. I definitely think that a familiarity with spreadsheets is going to be very important because this is going to be a significant task bringing in large amounts of data. And remember, going back to the GIGO principle earlier, if you don't enter accurate data while you're placing it in here, you won't have accurate data inside the logbook. When I'm supporting the logbook questions through your emails that you send in to team@foreflight.com, I always say that the key to conversion is formatting, because the information that we put into here, you've got to make sure that it goes in the right category and that it's expressed properly. From the same web page that you downloaded the CSV file from, you'll also be able to tap and read our formatting notes. This is also available as a support document at foreflight.com/support. When you're reading this information, it will show you the proper formatting that you're supposed to place in the data entry fields, such as for the dates, you really need to use the year, month, date format. For aircraft IDs, you want to make sure that you keep all of the data together without spaces. And then so on and so forth down, you'll see each one of those lines as the properly formatted data that our import tool is going to be looking for to be able to convert your data into the actual code that ForeFlight operates on. We also, in the import template, we have it's a series of notes for you. So we can see that above in the aircraft table, above aircraft ID, we actually say this is a text field. Under year, we show you the format for the year below it. The information on the formatting line is not going to be imported into the ForeFlight program because the import tool is actually going to scrutinize the name of the data, where it's located, and then decipher where that data is supposed to go. When you're bringing in a CSV file, when you start using other programs such as Numbers or Excel, if you take the first word where it says ForeFlight Logbook Import and you separate that into 3 different cells, it's going to either place a tab or a comma between those. And that could cause an error on your import saying that it doesn't recognize that as a properly formatted CSV file. If you run into that, you can simply just delete the first line and not have ForeFlight Import tool as the first line, or you can just properly format it into one cell. Again, we have these separated into the aircraft table and flights table, so they're not independent on each other. If you only want to import your aircraft information, which is what we're going to see in the next slide, you can just enter aircraft only information. We're going to need to separate that by ID, equipment type, type code, the year, make, and model, and then we're going to get into category and class, and then our advanced time tracking with your gear type, engine type, and then the selections for complex, high performance, and pressurized. Remember, this information needs to be accurate so that the experience report will provide the correct amount of information for that report to populate. On the next slide under the flights table, it's the exact same thing. You don't have to fill in the aircraft information to import flights data. So you can just leave the the aircraft information blank, and then you can just populate the flights table alone. And remember, accurate data again. So Thomas showed you earlier that he had a custom field in there for designating flights for cross-country time that was greater than 50 nautical miles. You can actually import your data if you are keeping track of such a custom field and place that inside the app. Thomas already showed you that you can do it under More Logbook, Settings, Configure Fields, and be able to enter that custom field information that way. Or we can use a bracketed format where the brackets format the type of information and then the title comes second. So you can see as the example here, if you want to count the number of grouse landings using the plus and minus symbol that you're already used to for doing your plus landings, well, you're going to want to bracket the counter with a capital C, and then you're going to want to enter your information in subsequently. Now, spaces are kind of tricky. In ForeFlight Mobile, when you're entering, spaces aren't currently supported. Actually, here is a loophole where you don't have to have an underscore. A space will work and translate in the import tool. However, I do suggest keeping the formatting the same. That way, when it exports the next time, you get the exact correct data coming back out. So using an underscore is definitely suggested here. Now, again, I mentioned that some of you might be using another logbook program, and I know you're just ready to get back over here and bring that over into ForeFlight. So if you do already have a program, we do have the ability to bring that information directly in. Our import page is where you're going to bring both your previously created data that you just did that we walked through in our import template, or you can take the data that was exported from your other digital logbook, copy and paste that information to our template, and then bring it here for the import tool. You'll notice that we have a big caution there saying that if you import the CSV multiple times, you will create duplicate logbook entries. This is a simple form. It is not going to review your previous logbook data and omit duplicates. CFIs like Thomas and myself will fly the same flight multiple times a day in the same aircraft with the same attributes. So if the tool was looking to create to not allow duplicates, you would have to have a unique identifier for every flight. And that's not a tool that you want to have to deal with as just a basic user. The next we're going to see is we can download our import template here in our formatting notes that we mentioned just previous. Now there's one more tool on this page worth mentioning is the reset tool. The reset tool is going to remove all of the data in your logbook. So if you have found multiple discrepancies and you want to make a large scale correction, you can first export the data from the export tab at the top of the page, make your corrections, reset your logbook, and bring it back in by clicking and dropping the file on the import tool. However, if you have CFI signatures, photos, or endorsements, those are not backed up in an export. So if that's the case and you run into an issue like this, reach out to us at team@foreflight.com. We can restore previous edits and bring those signatures back, and then you'll have to make those corrections actually in the app. So importing your spreadsheet file, whether it was copy and pasted from another logbook source or it was the data that you did, is going to give you a preview after you drop the file here. This is what we want to see here is no cautions or warnings at the top of the screen. We've got our total number of entries and hours and aircraft information, and then it's going to tell us the first row and last row of that import data. And this is exactly what we want to see. However, if you do receive some errors at the top, you don't have to fret. Some of the errors will be able to be permitted. It just means that it's not recognizing all of your data, and that data may be omitted. Go ahead and review that information, and if you can correct it prior to pressing the Import to Logbook button, then you don't have to worry about any resets or duplicate entries. However, if the data is not going to be in the proper formatting, you're going to get this red error here. And the red error is going to say, this is data that you actually need to go correct. And then that one more error that I was mentioning earlier about that, when it says that it does not recognize it as a CSV file, go take a look at that first tab in your data, because it might just not be recognizing that information, and make sure that you get that in one spacing. However, if it's formatted through tabs, commas, or semicolons, however you have it set. And now we're ready to import our data, and we press the blue Import to Logbook button. So now it's important that we verify our data. I always suggest taking a screenshot of your preview so that when you go to the experience report next, you can see that total number of hours is 33.6. Total numbers of entries is 24 here, but that includes 22 flights and 2 simulator flights, entering the total number of entries. And that way you just know that you've got the correct amount of information in your logbook. Expanding on bringing in other formatting from other logbook providers. You can bring those in via the copy-paste or the modify to match formatting. Remember that the key to conversion is formatting. So if you're going to copy and paste that data, make sure that you're taking all of the aircraft IDs and putting them in the proper column. Make sure that all the dates are associated with those aircraft IDs, and that the departure and arrival airports go in the proper fields. Another way to do this, and it's a little easier, but you really got to pay attention to the wording, is the modify to match. You take their existing format, and if they call their aircraft IDs tail numbers, well, our program is going to be looking for aircraft ID with no space. So you would simply just change that data header to the formatting notes that were found on the logbook import page, and make sure that you have to, from, total time, PIC, etc. across, making sure that those headers are properly formatted. One of the more popular programs, and the one that I actually personally used before coming to ForeFlight, was Log10 Pro. The great thing about Log 10 Pro is it's so complex and has so much data. So it does fulfill a lot of needs for some pilots. However, I love the simplicity of ForeFlight's logbook and how it all seamlessly functions with the main app. So remember that because the complexity of Logbook Pro might have a lot of data fields that don't automatically translate into the ForeFlight logbook, you're going to see a yellow formatting note here talking about the erroneous data that is not going to be brought in. So if this information, you actually want this coming into the ForeFlight logbook, remember the formatting slide that I talked about earlier with custom content. You can just customize that header bar, say that it's going to be a text field or an hour field or a counter field, and then you can name it whatever the same. So like here it says high altitude ops or high density altitude ops. I mean, there were so many data fields in Log 10 Pro. You can still bring that custom information in. You just want to make sure that when you export from Log 10 Pro that you use the dynamic flight tab txt file format. Remember that once you click and drop that new data in, because some of that data was erroneous, you need to verify that data. So to do that, you can download it into ForeFlight and then go to those files and make sure that the data was placed in the correct areas. If it was not, you can erase your logbook and start over again, or reach out to us at team@foreflight.com. Let us roll your logbook back, and then you can make those edits again if there was pre-existing data. For Zulu Log is even simpler than ForeFlight, so it's a great alternative to just drop into ForeFlight. However, there are many fields missing from Zulu Log information. So remember that when you bring in this information directly, that you just want to make sure that the headers are correct. And we're available 7 days a week from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. Central Time. And always remember to reach out to us at team@foreflight.com. We love to share our passion for both aviation and ForeFlight with all of our customers. And we also offer the best customer service in the industry, bar none.
Awesome walkthrough on getting converted there, Joey. Great stuff on getting all of your entries brought in there. Complicated process, and being able to reach out to team at ForeFlight is going to be super helpful for getting all that done. We've got a couple of questions that you guys have been submitting throughout the webinar here, and we'd like to get some of those answered for you. So our first question is, in case you don't discuss it, what is the best way to convert your endorsements into the digital logbook? Joey, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So I always tell people that remember that we can add photos to our endorsements. So with your paper logbook, you can always take a picture of that actual endorsement. Say it's like an old complex high performance that you've had for years and it's actually in your paper logbook. You can fill out the details from that endorsement in your own endorsement and then take a photo of it, including your CFI signature, and then just attach that to the endorsement. That still provides all of the relative data. It's got there shouldn't be expiration dates on some of these, but if there is an expiration date, you still can enter that. And then the photo actually takes it directly from the paper logbook into your digital logbook. So I've got a question here, and it says that once you have entered an aircraft into the logbook, I do not see a way to go back and edit the radio tabs. And I think he's talking about the high performance and complex switches that you can turn on and off. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, this is a good question. Maybe I've imported my my aircraft through your importing process there. The great thing about all of this being inside of ForeFlight is it's all going to be edited for me. So I can go to more logbook aircraft, and then I can edit the details of any of the aircraft that I have entered into my logbook there. So if I forgot to add that this was a complex aircraft, then I can simply go back
and change that radio tab.
Great. And is there a way to associate more than one track log with a logbook entry?
Yeah, this is a good one. We get this a lot, especially out of the training environment where we maybe fly like a round robin cross country or something. So there's not a specific to associate a single track, more than one track log with a single logbook entry. What we recommend is if you are flying those more kind of round robin, complicated flights, multi-leg flights like that, that you make a logbook entry for each leg and bring the track log for that, and then just edit the times for the specific leg that you flew there.
That's great information. And then how do I enter a BFR or IPC into the ForeFlight logbook?
Yeah, this is great. So there's a couple of pieces here. Let's say I just finished a review. I managed to knock out both review and IPC, just one good long review session there. And now I want to make sure that I have an entry that reflects legally that I had that done and inside of the currencies inside of ForeFlight. So on the logbook entry for my flight that I finished all of this on, there's a section called flight tags. Tapping on that will allow me to add things like BFR, IPC, 6158 type checks, things like that. And that flight tag is what tells ForeFlight that I've now completed that event. So that's what will go through and update all of my currencies so that I see that I now have another 6 months or another year before I need to do those events again. However, I also need to make sure that my instructor then goes through and gives me an endorsement or a sign-off through our qualification section for those different events. The flight tag is what tells ForeFlight that you got it done. The endorsement is what tells the FAA that you got it done. So, got a question here for you. How do I record touch and goes?
So yes, we get this in the support area quite often. People ask why we actually designate full stop and then all landings as two different fields. It's because your currency summaries for your night and your 90 days actually say they have to be full stop landings. So that's why we actually say and annotate, especially the full stop landings. But if you would like to keep a track of just touch and goes separate from all landings, building a custom field is going to be the best way to do that. And you can use the counter again, the same way that you do with the regular landings, and then just either manually hit the plus or minus button, or you can type it in manually that way. And that will be another way for you to keep track of touch and goes separate from your other landings.
Cool. Those custom fields are full and a great thing to play around with in there. Another question for you, Joey. Does this support multiple tail numbers for the same type? My current logbooks program doesn't do that.
Absolutely. So what we're doing is, again, each one of these entries is able to be tracked by tail number or type. So that's what we were talking about with those Ketchup entries earlier. Some more simple logbooks will not allow you to do it by actual tail number. Another example of this is a lot of our seaplane pilots that also have wheels either inside those, or they can manually take those off and put the wheels back on. For those people, they always ask that it's the same tail number, but I'm performing, as the ASES role or the ASEL role. And how can they differentiate between those? I would always suggest creating two different logbook profiles, and you could be like November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and either like a little S or a little W saying for seaplane or water. And that is totally accepted in the logbook. And what that's going to do is you set up one as an ASEL aircraft, one as an ASES aircraft. And when you're doing those flights in the logbook, you just make sure that you choose the correct profile. And that will allow you to track a difference between your landings on the terrain or water and have it separate. And then, of course, you can always, if it's the same aircraft, you'll just have to choose one type of the other, and then you can use a custom field to either add. You'll be flying primarily as the ASES role and then occasionally add a terrestrial landing, then you would just add a custom field to that particular entry. So I've got a question for you, Thomas. Can ForeFlight show me options for photos? Say if I took photos during the flight, will it automatically give me those options?
Oh yeah, adding photos to logbook entries it's great. I love doing that. It keeps me sharp on where we went flying that day. But I don't always want to have to go through my Photos app and find all of the photos that I took on that particular flight. And luckily, I don't have to. If I give ForeFlight permission for those photos, ForeFlight will look at the time of our flight and the timestamps on the photo and suggest photos that occurred during that. So I can have those photos automatically suggested as options to then bring into my specific logbook entry. And that way I don't have to go and find all of the photos I took, particularly if we were doing some cool, terrain and I took a lot of photos.
Absolutely. And to add just a little bit to that is with me in particular, I never fly without ForeFlight. That was even before I worked for ForeFlight. However, I let my track logs do most of my logbook recording. So I'll end up with 15 or 20 draft logbook entries. And those can go back for up to 2 months prior to me actually editing my logbook. So that feature really comes in handy for being able to go back and find those photos that could be, buried 100 photos back in your photo library. So that's one of my absolute favorite functions of the ForeFlight Logbook.
Yeah, that's a good use case. One that I heard the other day from one of our team members was they take photos of their hobs and tack time right before they start up the aircraft, and then those photos get automatically suggested as part of that entry on their track log, so that they have that information right there ready to go. I got a question for you on how do I log simulator time in Flight Logbook?
Excellent question. I would say that this is probably 20% of the questions that I field. There's a lot of people out there that utilize advanced training simulators and doing their their IFR currencies. So they always write in with just different variations of the issues that they have. And they can really be simplified with understanding that for simulator time in ForeFlight, there's only 4 fields that you should enter when entering this information. The 4 fields are simulated flight, simulated instrument, and then either dual given or dual received. You do not have to have any of those categories, or you have to have the 3 that work out for you. But you can have simulator time without having instruction, and you can do simulated flight that doesn't include IFR currency requirements. However, people get confused because when they're under the hood and actually doing flying, they're actually operating the aircraft. So you are getting time and type and total time and PIC time and cross country time and all of those informations. But when you're sitting behind a computer screen, even if it's a full motion simulator, you may not qualify for total time or PIC time. In those cases, those are the only 4 fields that need to be entered. Now, the ForeFlight Logbook again is very simple. It's going to add the data that you place there. So if you enter more fields than those 4 in a simulated flight entry, it's going to total those times. So that's where the garbage in, garbage out principle comes back. Now, setting up your aircraft for a simulator is done exactly the same way that Thomas mentioned earlier, with one notation is that you change the equipment type to the version of the flight simulator that you're going to be utilizing. And then you just fill out the rest of those attributes. You'll have that simulator. You can choose that as the aircraft for those fields. And then just make sure that you remember only enter simulated flight, simulated instrument, or dual given and received. All right. And the final question that we're going to ask today, Thomas, is there a notes field in the logbook?
Yeah, this is the notes field for every instructor. Least favorite thing to try and cram everything into at the very end of a logbook entry. And there is, inside of ForeFlight, we call it the comments section. And I think the biggest benefit to this is I've got all the room in the world to play with in the comments section, and I don't have to take my finest pen and try and fit in all of the things we did on a flight. So I really like to go into that comments field, add all of my notes as an instructor, add the things that we did on that flight, anything that will kind of add context to it. And the nice thing is when I go to export stuff, that's going to come along with it in there. Well, awesome. With that, I think we're out of time here. I want to thank you all for joining us today on our Logbook webinar. You've got some resources up on the screen here for you if you'd like to find out more about using Logbook, using ForeFlight in general. Please reach out to us. We have some more webinars, so keep an eye out for different webinars from both our On Frequency series and our Pilot Command series.